Great, thank you. Okay, welcome everybody to my session, Designing and Implementing Microsoft 365 Adoption Center. And I'm Chirag Patel, and put the calendar, sorry, look out for the SharePoint conference, which is what it used to be called up to a few months ago. And it's now going to be called Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference, happening next year, March. And so brilliant conference to attend and get all the latest and greatest. Big thanks to these sponsors for making this event happening, and obviously without them it would be impossible. So if you haven't already, please check them out, and obviously apply for the raffle as well. And if you haven't done that as well, then please submit your answers as well. Otherwise, you have to be in it to win it. And good luck to you with that as well. Also, due to the current situation we're in, great cause, the sponsors funds that's going towards the all these charities here. So if you haven't already had a chance, please do so. And obviously, it's all in the good cause. So yeah, I'm Chirag Patel. I work with Patel Consulting as an independent consultant, working with SharePoint SQL Server for last 20 years. So I'm an IT pro by trade. And I work with many customers, client organizations, Microsoft partners to help deliver solutions to their customers too. You can connect with me on techchirag.com, as well as Twitter, LinkedIn, and other social areas as well. And in my spare time, when I used to be able to cycle, I used to love cycling. So all the charity bicycle marathons and everything else. So really good way to kind of get out and about in there. One of the things I find I attend these sessions as well as speak at these events is purely to learn from the community how everyone's working with the technology, and especially with Microsoft 365 is just a huge platform. So when you get the slides, they have all the links in them. My slides share.net, Check Chirag has got all the slides since the records began. So hopefully you will find them useful. And if you do in and around Europe or anywhere in the near future, hopefully when the restrictions are lifted, then please do check out some of these community events as well. So what we're going to cover is a real-world case scenario in terms of how they went about rolling out Microsoft 365 purely as a big bang approach, which is not kind of unfamiliar, if you like. But obviously, I have a kind of a experience working with this organization in order to how we went about doing that. But also kind of working with the users and champions in order to kind of help us accelerate, if you like, the rollout of Microsoft 365, and how some of the communications, if you like, and the training aspects of it, how we kind of shortcutted, if you like, which is something that I would not recommend anybody, but purely for the constraints we were in. The cost constraint is the biggest one. So there were some ways to actually get about in order to get everybody on board and sustain that adoption as well. And it's never a stopping point either. So what you see today is all merely a kind of a starting point to your adoption journey. So hopefully this session kind of gives you some of the things that you may have considered already that may make it better, or if you haven't, then hopefully you will learn a lot from it as well. And feel free to post your questions in the Q&A panel, and I will try and answer them towards the end of the presentation. So the company that I worked with is a renewable energy company, and it's basically a very small company, around 2,500 users, spread around globally in 10 different countries, from the US all the way to Australia. And basically, all their expertise is through basically, designing, manufacturing solar panels, wind plants, and the whole lot. And in terms of kind of acquiring companies previously that they have done, so you have a situation where before we went on to the full Microsoft 365 program, we have various kind of systems that were being used in-house just to get basically job done for what they wanted to do, some specialist systems. And obviously everybody had their own kind of silos, their own little corners of looking after their spreadsheets, or kind of using emails very heavily. Kind of if you like, a familiar story before Microsoft 365 comes along. But now the main part was that projects is pretty much what they did, and not just purely from a formal projects, but anybody who speak to in this organization, everything was a project. So you can imagine that the definition of project was like, okay, well, when does it finish? And if there was no finish date, then to me that was not a project, but most probably it was some kind of a work package or some kind of a workload. So in terms of why they wanted to roll out Microsoft 365, purely because they wanted to become truly a global company, even though being in 10 countries did not really kind of, if you like, justify their users or their systems or their processes to be considered as a truly global company. But the main driver here was to be able to encourage collaboration between all the colleagues and being able to tap into each other's expertise and being able to ask questions and basically kind of have some kind of a standardized way of working. And that's that was only going to happen through platforms such as Microsoft 365, but that's still a technology before even users come to know about it. And then, of course, as the journey kind of starts and continues with Microsoft 365, then the hope is that things become efficient. Also, people become a lot more smarter and become very productive as well through various uses of the apps and services, as well as being able to use a platform such as Microsoft 365 that's kind of very ahead of its, if you like, in terms of the competition against the organization's competitors. So that was kind of the main area for them to be able to drive with that. But also they were using lots and lots of other third-party tools, WhatsApp and all the other familiar video conferencing tools, BlueJeans, the whole lot. And that's fine, all these tools have their place. But again, when you look at it from a cost perspective, there's no real way to justify the cost for it. And people have their own views, or companies have their own views in terms of, Teams versus some third-party tool. And that's really kind of, in my view, not really kind of thought through process properly, because I still come across organizations who have got Microsoft Teams and they still use some other tools as well to communicate. So it kind of makes it really messy and being able to manage an integrated solution as well. So just before we go ahead, it is worth kind of highlighting very quickly what exactly is Microsoft 365. And essentially it's kind of split into three components. You have the desktop apps, and recently they kind of undergone through some name change ceremony from Office 365 to Microsoft 365, but it's still the same thing under the hood. So you got your Office apps, and then you got the major part of the solutions, which is your online services around SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, Exchange, and so on, as well as some of the business apps in there as well. And then you got your second component, which is your Windows 10. And this is kind of not only being able to work with your previous versions of Windows through code management, of endpoint configuration management and manager and so on, but being able to bring all those Windows 10 devices and being able to also work with your mobility and security as well. So not just corporate owned mobile devices, but also people having their own personal devices who can connect to your Microsoft 365 tenant as well. So this is probably the main reason why they wanted to go with this as a Microsoft 365, to try and kind of consolidate and have some kind of a homogeneous system where everything's kind of integrated and controlled. But that doesn't answer the question why you still wanted to use Microsoft 365, because that's still all the technology areas, if you like. But in terms of translating exactly what you're going to do with Microsoft 365, and this is a particular slide that I always tend to use as a starting point to have those helpful kind of discussions and conversations around, what exactly is going to tick the box, what is exactly going to cross and make it a green light to say that yes, we're using Microsoft 365, and not just from a functionality perspective, but also making sure that it's also being securely being used, because I come across so many organizations who will roll out SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, everything very quickly, but then leave, if you like, the security for later phases of the program. And that's probably okay as long as the risks are accepted. But if you're going to start off new, then you may as well start with at least a few policies to begin with, which we will look at, but also being able to then work around with the users to say that we're going to be using Microsoft 365 for internal communications, for collaboration, both internal and external, and also document management as well. And so the way we kind of went about doing this is firstly to translate each of these technology workload pieces, if you like, to see which bits we're going to use. And then we kind of went further into that to kind of phase it, doing a phase-based approach. And as far as the technical teams and the project team were concerned, they were very clear in terms of what their plan looked like in terms of phase 1 to phase 4, which was around firstly to understand and being able to gather various kind of information around how the users work, what kind of particularly what kind of documents they use, what kind of projects they work with, where are these projects based, and that's kind of important stuff, because yes, you can discover the scenarios and use cases, but one of the things that takes time is to understand the culture, and especially when you're dealing with an organization within these 10 countries, then it was very kind of important to understand that we all have to be singing from the same page when we roll out Microsoft 365. And that's fine, but then this plan was communicated to all the users in the organization, so to make it very crystal clear what exactly intranet was, what collaboration actually meant, what SharePoint was able to do, what Yammer was able to do, and so on. And then we obviously kind of left document management for phase 3, because to try and do phase 3 as well as phase 2 together, it would have become such an overwhelming experience for the organization, who would then undergo the change to try and work with this new Microsoft 365. But one of the first things I always find when I was working with the change manager in this organization is, and they were ProSci certified, and they knew their stuff and everything else, and that's great, and that's exactly what we needed here. But what I found is that it is worth saying that you still have to have some knowledge and some experience around Microsoft 365, because some of the conversations having with the change managers was almost like, what does SharePoint do? What does OneDrive do? Never mind the scenarios, and that's fine. But that kind of takes out a lot of time and a lot of energy to try and explain what exactly SharePoint and OneDrive does, when we know that Microsoft, the document center, if you like, has got all the useful videos, little bite-sized videos. So that's kind of something we found that to train the change managers what Microsoft 365 was all about was kind of slightly more consuming as a challenge. And then the technical users were kind of left towards the end to try and train them at the end of the solution to work out what exactly was SharePoint, how the solution that was delivered is going to work for this organization. And so in my view, this should have happened right at the beginning instead of at the end. So train the technical users first with full capabilities of Microsoft 365, and then obviously focus on the key workloads there. And then we come to the business users as well as the managers and then field workers that we had to deploy Yammer to. And so when you look at it from an impact perspective, then the scenarios and to begin with, there were very few use cases and scenarios to work with in terms of working in the field, being able to communicate with the head office, the back office staff, and everybody else. But nevertheless, Yammer which is in a useful way of kind of having that collaboration going on. But that was another area where some field workers who would be on a contract basis would not really come to sign into such systems to try and use Yammer, and they would be using some third-party tools or their personal emails as well in order to communicate with the organization. So it was a challenge for everybody, but every user was considered in terms of how Microsoft 365 is going to impact them and what it actually meant for them. So this was the part that takes the longest amount of time. But obviously, with the constraints that we had, and budget is always put on these kind of programs, but then if you rush into it, then that's when things will slow down. So in our case, our phase 2 was slightly longer than what it should have happened. So, and that's only because not enough training was put into place, which I think, in my view, should have been put in first place for change managers as well as some of the key users as well. One of the key parts, and you will see this from Microsoft's own website as well, they have a Microsoft adoption packs as well, all clearly laid out plans and templates and emails and all these kind of communication plans you can do, and that's good, and that's pretty much what we used for the best part of the materials. But the bit that really, the value that comes over here is choosing the right people. Initially, we kind of got a list given to say so and so people will be interested, and that's fine. We can spend the time and energy doing that, but we wanted to make sure there's a right mix of people, in a sense that we also wanted to make sure, because this company used a lot of contractors as well, so we needed to make sure that there's a right mix of people, of both permanent staff as well as contractor staff, and also a mix of somebody who's really tech enthusiast, but also somebody who's very business critical, who probably just doesn't like the technology as well. So we wanted to get that good mix to build our champions network. And that's something that I was given the responsibility to do that. Now, I'm not a change manager, but I've certainly kind of followed some of the courses as well as some of the useful guidance working with that. So in terms of shortcutting the path, which I mentioned earlier, was firstly to get, if you like, an army of people from this organization who would help me to try and kind of figure out how this solution is going to be rolled out and how we take those kind of use cases and scenarios in order to manage to roll out something like Microsoft 365. So clearly Microsoft Teams was a kind of a winner for it, if you like, in order to get familiarized with Microsoft Teams and being able to sort of have conversations, manage plans, as well as planning all the champions related activities, showcasing new functionalities, and also delivering those kind of programs within that. And so these were like kind of weekly meetings in the beginning, but obviously not just for one region, but all 3 regions. So fairly full-time kind of activity just to manage the champions as well as get them onboarded. So that's the part that takes longest to begin with. But once they were on board, then we were able to actually kind of excel quite further quickly in order to communicate and also involve them in other all the other activities around, from training, management, as well as sourcing an external company to deliver a short training of the entire Microsoft 365 in a day or so to kind of get them onboarded and all essentially feel loved, if you like, to be part of this program. And so these are some of the examples, if you like, from a scenarios perspective. So the kind of template we use this, and there are some, sort of good templates from, from everybody out there. And that's great. You can use what works for you. But for us, kind of, not kind of getting into the depths of the business and what the ins and outs were. So we had to kind of settle down, if you like, from this perspective to say that if you're going to work with Excel documents and instead of attaching to those emails, then you can kind of do that in a slightly different way using within Microsoft Teams. And so these are kind of some of the ways you can look at in terms of how we were planting the seed, if you like, from a user's perspective, how things you're going to do different. And absolutely clear, we had to make it that this change is going to happen in the sense that whether you like it or not, but this is how you're going to make things better, because sooner or later, if you don't use it, then you're only going to struggle because your colleagues will already jump onto using Teams and other Microsoft 365 services. So we kind of laid this out for them, and we used this particular kind of scenario in every kind of communications, just to kind of reinforce, if you like, that kind of message to say, this is why we're doing it at the user level, why we're going with the new systems. So all the helpful messages really helps, and not just kind of stating the fact to say we're doing this activity, but giving the examples like these really worked. And then we answer the questions or queries, or maybe redo the managing the changes aspects of things. So in terms of the comms plan, if you like, and the activities, so yes, the intranet was on a completely different system, so that was getting migrated, but also being able to kind of producing the necessary, the bare minimum, if you like, the countdown emails, the launch programs, and kind of having the, if you like, the solution being named as well, being kind of giving its own identity. But also being able to kind of work through up to the post go live support as well around how each of these activities is going to work, and across all sort of 10 countries with different, if you like, champions in different countries, being able to kind of marry that up in the same page. And again, very kind of low tech, if you like, at the time, unlike now, it's a lot more easier to use kind of the post-it notes and meeting rooms and everything else. And now there are, I know, third-party tools that can allow you to do that as well, kind of use your virtual post-it note boards and everything else. But again, the idea is not to share the plan, but was to share the building of the plan through post-it notes and everything else, and then being able to share all those plans in terms of those campaigns that we did from that. And so once the solution went live as part of the phase 2, which was the collaboration, Yammer and everything else, then what we devised was basically kind of a thematic based events, and of which there were about 6 events, one taking every 3 weeks, if you like, for the duration of the after go live. So over a kind of next few months, we had events planned out as to what each event was meant to do. So for example, being able to discover information and expertise around the organization. So that was kind of one of the examples of the event. And so for every event, we would have a customer story from the internal organization itself, from a senior manager, so who would actually deliver a PowerPoint presentation and showcasing their example of that particular theme, in this case, discovering information, how that's working for them through the demonstration. And we would then deliver the actual ins and outs around how to make that happen. So that's one example, and we will do 3 sessions of delivering, for example, like what is Delve, how Delve works with other systems, and also how SharePoint works in order to kind of looking up the people card and being able to see what files they work with and so on. So that was a session that was done 3 times in that week in 3 different time zones. And then we would provide a complimentary article that would go on the intranet, as well as our help site, which we'll look a bit later as well. And then being able to support that through posters, email campaigns, and then having that one session around Ask Me Anything type clinic towards the end of that week. So we had a full week basically to try and come up with these knowledge-based events 6 times for 6 different topics. And that was really proved useful. People would just bring their own kind of questions, being able to learn more from that, but also being able to kind of give them that tailored experience of delivering that kind of not training, but the guidance around how to use Microsoft 365 solutions as well. And that worked really great. And then that was followed by lunch and learn sessions as well, which was kind of a very short bites of functionalities of a particular part of the system. And this probably, in my view, was the biggest effort that would require, and with limited resources, pretty much only the few of us who have to be able to support all these activities between the change manager, myself from the technical stance, as well as being able to configure and being able to kind of help and aid the the people around supporting the event. So very worthwhile of doing that. So at the time, one of the things, especially before something that's called Microsoft 365 Learning Pathways, before it came, it used to be a very manual way of doing it. And this came about at the time when I created just a plain SharePoint site, no customizations of any sort, plain SharePoint site to post the necessary resources for SharePoint and Yammer and Teams and everything else. And then being able to organize the site accordingly so that it becomes a purely working help site, being able to post our knowledge events and sessions and slides and everything else. And then this came along, which kind of, which was very much demanded by all the organizations anyways, because purely on the basis that all the documentation and everything else was just not very clear. So Microsoft have done a great job to make this solution available for any organizations to be able to download the site template solution from that link over there, and being able to put that in your own tenant, and it comes all pre-populated, referencing to all the Microsoft documents and the short videos you get by visiting that, but except it comes through your own SharePoint site. So kind of use this, and this came at the time when we were rolling out the system. So this kind of took on very quickly for us, being able to then build our own playlist, bringing other systems as well, and all the help documentation. So it was a very simple help site, especially when we had no training managers or nothing. So this became the site for us, the go-to place. So if you haven't had a look at it, and I know there were some sessions running in this conference, then do please take a look at that. It's very rich, very easy, and very quick to kind of look at that on your mobile, as well as on the SharePoint side there as well. So this was kind of a, if you like, the out-of-the-box experience. And then what we kind of did further on is we kind of tailored this with our own content. So both before going live, as well as after go live as well. So we kind of populated, because whilst most people understand what Yammer might mean, what Microsoft Teams mean, but we do get questions sometimes as to what's the difference between SharePoint and Microsoft Teams. So we kind of devised all the application information sheets with our own branding and everything else, and kind of just dotted that around in poster formats or in a kind of small card formats, purely for users to understand what each of the apps do. And then we had the success stories area in Yammer as a Yammer community. So then we brought that Yammer web part into SharePoint sites. So all the success stories or examples, or at least prompt the users to have that in that dialogue. So all that kind of came into this learning pathway site, including all the good old way of writing instructions, how to log into Microsoft 365, not just from your own computer, but also from mobile devices, or if you're out elsewhere using, say, Internet Cafe, how to log in securely. And whilst this may seem slightly a lot more kind of very simplistic view of it, but it was more about kind of hand-holding the users to make sure that they really understand what it really means to log into these systems. And so that kind of really brought us a really good buy-in, if you like, from the users who found that we did all this kind of helpful work. And then obviously using SharePoint site design planning guide from Suzanne Henley. If you go to her website, suzannehenley.com, she provides very good materials and guides, and being able to download and be able to use that. So, great work from Suzanne. And but obviously, when we rolled out SharePoint sites, and then obviously it was a question for the users, how do they go about managing it and styling it out and everything else. So that's kind of a good example for them to understand what parts were and what kind of things you can use. As well to put our events information within this site as well. So that was kind of a rich kind of content from our perspective for what the adoption center looked like for our users, and that kind of just became the place to go to basically build everything within that. And then even the technical users came on this side for their part of managing their training, their videos, their learnings, as well as their own stories within that. So all happening within this one learning pathways site. Something that's really kind of, I've added this in here, but at the time this was not available for us. But again, because with Microsoft 365 constantly coming out with new features and in the message center, and then you would have to pick that message up, massage it, put in kind of really even more simplistic language for the users to understand what's coming next on their kind of systems. But what you have now, that from an administrator's perspective, you can control around which features within here you want your users to see when it lights up in their Word or Excel. So, if they go in their what's new, that will light up depending on what you've decided to switch on or off. It doesn't necessarily disable the feature, but it kind of just prompts them that extra kind of attention as to what, in this case, what Sketchy is all about in Word and Excel. So that kind of shows up, and that was kind of a way, a change for them to be able to get that on-demand kind of learning from that. And then I think one of the things that always get left behind, depending on with this organization, they didn't have a SharePoint administrator. They didn't really have somebody who knew too much about Microsoft 365. So in a way, to kind of manage for them, because they typically manage, if you like, servers and not so much of services. So that was a challenge to switch the kind of the minds around servers to services. And then obviously, when you look at the landscape perspective here, is not only you've got the roadmap, the message center, but there are also the blogs as well. So again, this is kind of, on a daily basis, in some cases a weekly basis, but again, to build that time for the technical users so that they're also prepared to inform the business users and the solution owners to say that this is coming our way. How do we want to proceed with this? Do we want that switched off or disabled or what have you? And if it doesn't get looked at, then obviously the risks were there. So this was kind of a new way for the admins to really understand how to manage the changes within Microsoft 365 itself. And then once the users got onto it, we kind of got a lot of demand around how to kind of, fulfill their requests. So yes, all the requests would go into your kind of your help desk system. But obviously, every user request you get is an interest. So, that kind of process was really made clear for everybody how this is going to work, how long it's going to take for what they ask for, what they get. But typically, you would want to review those requests. In some cases, if you want to say switch on shifts in Teams, for example, then you may want to consider extending that pilot, or you might want to use Power Apps connecting, say, with CDS, and you might want to build model-driven apps. Then again, with CDS, there's a huge impact on the licensing costs, depending on how you want to kind of approach your usage. Then you may want to have the budget approval for that as well. And then obviously architecturally review how that fits in line with your other systems. And then obviously inform the user as to when you're going to do it, and if not now, then when. So it's kind of keeping the users in the loop for that, so that at least they know that what they've got today from Microsoft 365 is not for definite, because it's just going to change and change. So being able to manage that. So this was the point I mentioned earlier, that if you're not going to train your technical users in the beginning, and you're going to leave them to the last to let them work out how to train on how to work on SharePoint or Yammer or manage Microsoft Teams, then at least this gives you a clear path for your technical people. And this is something that we recommended. They didn't really go with that, because to kind of send somebody away on a full-time 5-day course or whatever you, it was their take on that. But obviously, if you do this in the beginning, at least get most part of it, then at least you will have more idea around how your solution is going to get involved within that. So hopefully this kind of helps. And again, that's kind of refreshing a lot around some of these courses as well. So like with any system, if we don't measure it, then we don't really know in which direction we're going. And whilst if you like, the attitude was not kind of really formal in a strict sense, where we had kind of a set numbers around what those targets should look like. But as a starting point, these were kind of, if you like, the drivers for it in terms of what exactly we're going to measure. So, you know, we look at the obviously logins from Microsoft 365 through the use of Power BI, the adoption pack, which gives you all that kind of information. But when you look at Delve profile, there's no way within your Microsoft 365 where you get clear indication around what the status of your Delve profile looks like. So that's something we had to kind of put a custom PowerShell script for it, and then kind of deciding exactly which attributes of the Delve are you going to measure your successes on. So when we roll something out, yes, you get your name and everything else coming through your Delve, but if you don't put anything about yourself or your interests and all those, we had about 4 or 5 different attributes, then that's the script would go and look at that and say if it's empty to report that it's not been filled out. And so this was kind of really stressed out with the management to make them realize that if your people are not using, if they're not filling out the information, then people are not going to be able to understand how to tap into each other's expertise. So that's kind of one area, if you like, as to what completion meant. So if they filled all 5 attributes to it, then obviously your Delve profile is complete. Now, whether that's up to date or out of date, that's a different question. But at least to begin with, this was a good indicator for us. And then in addition to obviously you got your usual reports, usage analytics that you get from your Microsoft 365, and that's great, and that's what we use that as well. But the big part was it from the knowledge based. So from a change management perspective, are people actually watching all those videos? Are they actually attending those event sessions that we had planned? How many questions did we get? So we kind of, in a very kind of ad hoc way, recording all those kind of figures to be able to kind of report back that is the guidance working or not, because to try and send everybody on training was a different ball game altogether. But the main thing is that this was a very informal way, being able to kind of come into the knowledge-based events and being able to target the learning from that. So that kind of targets for us kind of worked well. As well as the drop-in visits as well. So if they had their own problems, then we just have to monitor that. They were very low numbers, but at least it was a way for us to be able to report back to say, depending on how, on the workloads that people would find the time to do these things, then at least we're in the right direction of travel, as opposed to just putting a finger on a particular number to say, we shall have to have this many numbers of attendances. So hopefully this kind of helps you in your journey from that perspective, if you want to record some of the adoption metrics in there. And so that kind of brings me as a kind of a very, there's a lot more to share within that adoption pack, but hopefully in this kind of the last kind of 40 minutes or so brings you gives you a good insightful journey around how we kind of did it. But just like to say, thanks for being with me. And if you haven't already, once again, please make your donations to the charities. And I'll kind of just look over to the Q&A panel, but feel free to post some questions if you haven't already. But there's my details. Please fill out the feedback, good, bad, doesn't really matter. If we don't hear it, then we don't know how we're all performing as well. So do appreciate if you take your time to fill that out as well. And there's my blog site to connect, and then I'll post the slides out later on. So yeah, thank you for joining us.
And there are 5 questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, sure. I'm just going to look over that now. This is the same issue I had before when I just couldn't look at the Q&A.
Do you need me to just read them to you?
Yeah, please. I think it'd make it easier. I had the same problem and my Teams client crashed, so I want to try and avoid that if I can. Yeah, please go ahead, Teresa.
Okay. The first one is, what are the most common risks to mitigate when adopting Microsoft 365?
I believe, in my view, it's the information protection. I think there's too much of an appetite to just go ahead and roll out Teams, SharePoint, and so on, and then being able to worry about the how to protect your information, your files, chats for later on. So I think that's a common risk. Unless you're a large organization, you will do that first. But otherwise, for small, medium enterprises and no resources, they tend to jump with the functionality first.
Next question. I'm having trouble getting leadership buy-in on Microsoft 365. Any tips for convincing executives on why we should be using Microsoft 365?
Yeah, believe it or not, I went up to the CEO and asked, what do you like about Microsoft 365? So it takes a bit of a courage to ask that. I think that's kind of more from a cheeky kind of question. I think from this perspective, first of all, who's paying the bill? And yes, it can be viewed as a rubber stamp exercise for some organizations, but unless you don't get the dialogue, if there is no that interaction, and when I say the interaction, I mean even a weekly meeting in the beginning, or the CIO who's not actively involved, then really it's a struggle, and then it really becomes an IT's job really to drive that program. But otherwise, it's it's tough. But you need to get definitely the CEO and the CIO on your side.
Okay. And next question, is it okay to roll out Teams to the company before SharePoint and Yammer?
If that question was asked me 2 years ago, I would have said no. But now I think it's been more than 3 years since Microsoft Teams has been out, and it's really good now. It's really matured. And my answer to that would be yes, do Teams first. But when we look at SharePoint, you have to have SharePoint enabled, otherwise it just won't work. So you haven't got a choice. You got to have SharePoint enabled. But the clear guidance I would say is inform your users what's the difference between Teams and SharePoint. And SharePoint is purely from a Teams perspective, being able to post your files, but it does a lot more than that, which is pages and lists and everything else. So yeah, I think isolate yourselves collaboration versus document management to begin with.
Okay.
Some good questions, by the way.
Yeah.
Very good. I like it.
Did you have a champions network across all Microsoft 365 services, or did you have a champions team per service, i.e. one for Teams, one for Yammer, one for Power BI, etc.?
No, we had one champion for everything. So the way we went about doing that was just for the champions. We got the external training company who gave us kind of a full end-to-end view of what Microsoft 365 is exactly, and being able to then touch on each apps and services to work out what it's meant to do. And then we were able to kind of work with the champions with our own business scenarios to say we're going to use SharePoint for posting, for our intranet pages, being able to post our collaboration files, and for our document management, we were going to use purely just a SharePoint site with Teams not enabled for that particular project, for example, let's say. So we had clear kind of boxes, if you like, to say what Teams and SharePoint will be used for and what just SharePoint will be used for.
Okay.
So yes, I think make it everybody.
Can you show us a demo of how the adoption site looks?
I haven't got it with me here. What I will say is I'll put the link. I know there are some samples. If you look at the, I believe is it look, it's what's it called? Is it lookbook.com? I think that's the one. If you look at that to begin with, and I think is it Julie Turner, I believe, who's done some work on the Microsoft Learning Pathways. Then there are some demos, but I'll put the link on my slides, being able to sort of get that to you if that helps.
Okay. And that is all of the questions, unless anybody has any new ones.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think, good questions. It's not easy. I think one thing I would probably say is that even though when I left that organization, the adoption journey still continues. So it's something that, from a project perspective, it's always an activity that has to be completed at some point. But I think Microsoft 365 is one system that's just organic, unlike your financial or HR system. So yeah, just keep everybody focused on that, and just happy successes with the Microsoft 365.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Teresa. Thanks for moderating the session. Really appreciate your help, and thanks to all the attendees. And enjoy the rest of the conference, and check out the community zone as well. Great, thanks.